Hello everyone, Just Podcast TV is here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified on new contents.
Episode 386, Reminisce. Although Leandra was not as sensible as Millie, she was still a child after all. It made people's heart ache when they saw her, especially the conversation between Sandra and Greg. It made Zach understand their current predicament, so Zach did not think too much about it. To him, $20 could be exchanged for the bright smile of a child. It would be worth it. Or to some extent, he was also using this method to reminisce about Millie, who had passed away. Leandra was very happy, but she still stared at the Barbie doll in Zach's hand and said against her will, "I don't want it." It could be seen that she refused gifts from others and didn't want other people's things. Leandra still had a good family education. The child's understanding in this area was related to the parents. If the parents were sensible, the child would naturally be sensible. Zach rubbed Leandra's head. "I know a young lady. She is 3 years older than you, but she is as tall as you. She is as cute as you too. She has never eaten a cake in her life. Her biggest wish is to have a bite of the cake." Leandra was very surprised. "Leandra also likes to eat cake, and Leandra often eats cake. If little Missy is willing to eat, Leandra can give it to her." Zach smiled. "Leandra has cake to eat because Leandra has a father and mother who love you. But little Missy doesn't have a father and mother. She only has a 10-year-old brother. Her brother picks up rubbish every day and feeds her." "So has the young lady eaten the cake yet?" Facing Leandra's question, Zach smiled and said, "She ate it. She said it was delicious." Leandra nodded and said, "It's almost Leandra's birthday. Uncle, can you call little Missy over to eat the cake? And little brother, I want to share the cake with them and share my happiness." Zach smiled and did not say anything. He stuffed the Barbie doll into Leandra's arms. "Happy birthday to you." The Barbie doll was put down. Zach got up and prepared to leave. But just as he took a few steps, the sound of hurried high heels hitting the ground came from behind. Sandra immediately caught up. "Thank you for your good intentions, but we can't accept this Barbie doll. As Sandra spoke, Zach smiled at her and asked, "Is the face of an adult important, or the smile of a child important?" Sandra was a little embarrassed and was stopped by Zach's question. Zach continued, "Just take it that I am using this method to reminisce about another child. You and Leandra can help me fulfill my wish." Zach smiled and nodded to Sandra, then turned around and left. After a few steps, Sandra's voice came from behind. "Where is this little one?" Zach's footsteps slightly trembled. Then he replied with a sad heart, "She's gone." This answer made Sandra's heart skip a beat. She guessed that the brother and sister who had a hard life should be the brother and sister that Zach had met before. Even when Leandra was crying on the side of the road, Zach would buy a Barbie doll from his own pocket to coax her. She believed that he would definitely do his best to help such a poor little brother and sister. She could feel that Zach was a good person. However, she never would have thought that the little girl, who was slightly older than Leandra, would be gone. After watching Zach leave, Sandra took the Barbie doll back to Leandra's side. Leandra seemed to be very happy, holding the Barbie doll. But on the way back, she still said to Sandra, "Mom, I will not ask for things randomly in the future. I will not cry anymore. Uncle said that the young lady didn't even eat cake, but the young lady didn't make a fuss. In the future, Leandra will be like the young lady and be an obedient and sensible baby." Sandra's heart warmed, and she could not help but turn her head to look at the direction where Zach left. She thought that perhaps this was the reason why Zach told Leandra about the little Missy. Zach returned to the hotel and went to sleep after washing up. He did not think too much about it. As for Sandra and Leandra, he only thought of them as the two people in his life who he would never meet again. The next morning, Zach and Donnie had breakfast and then drove to Honey Hospital. Looking at the various rented shops on the opposite side of the street, one could tell that the Honey Hospital was in dire straits. After all, the shops across the street from the hospital were flourishing. There were all kinds of products, restaurants, and even niche stores. It was very prosperous, and it was a small business circle formed by hospitals. Moreover, the more people the hospital treated, the more prosperous this business circle became. But now, it was a large number of shops that rented out their shops. It could be seen that the Honey Hospital had fallen into dire straits. The electronic bar in the front of the door was broken, and the broken parts were rusted. The cars came and went as they pleased. Many people were obviously going to do work nearby, but they parked their cars in the hospital parking lot because it was spacious enough, and they parked their cars for free. After Zach got out of the car and entered the hospital, he didn't let Donnie follow him. Instead, he got out of the car and entered the hospital by himself. In the spacious hospital hall, Zach finally found a nurse and asked the director about it. The nurse also ignored him and pointed at the elevator while playing with her phone, gesturing for Zach to take the elevator up. Zach asked, "Which floor?" "There's a floor sign on it. Do you not know how to read it yourself?" He was very impolite. It could be seen that this nurse, who did not even wear a hat, was not in a good mood. However, Zach was too lazy to argue with him. He walked directly to the front of the elevator. After looking at the sign, he found that the leader's office was on the 18th floor. According to common sense, many places didn't have an 18th floor. After all, there was an 18th floor of hell. It was very inauspicious. Some hospitals even set up the morgue on the 18th floor, as if to cater to the situation. But the hospital director was quite interesting. Zach tried pressing the button on the elevator, but there was no response. Only then did he realize that there was no electricity at all. There was no electricity on the 18th floor. This director really had a lot of stamina. There was no reason for him not to be able to climb the stairs if the director climbed. Thus, after making sure that all of the elevator's electricity had not been turned on, Zach directly started climbing. Not to mention, the 18th floor of the stairs was really tiring. No wonder no one was repairing the electric bar at the hospital entrance. It was estimated that even thieves would be worried when they came. There was not even an elevator. Stealing a computer to move down more than 10 floors was too tiring. It was too tiring and too lazy to steal. After finally reaching the 18th floor, Zach wiped the sweat off his forehead. It was a shame that he didn't have a woman by his side last night. Otherwise, today he was afraid that his legs would go soft after climbing up the 18th floor. Zach took a deep breath and walked towards the director's office marked on the sign. Just as he arrived at the director's office, he heard the sound of conversation coming from inside. "Professor, I'm sorry. I really can't do it anymore. My conscience doesn't allow me to continue doing this." It sounded like the person had committed some sort of evil mistake, causing him to feel very uneasy. However, this sound sounded somewhat familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before. After passing through the glass on the office door in the distance, Zach looked inside, wanting to see who this familiar voice belonged to. Episode 387, The Dean. Zach never thought that the person who was talking in the dean's office was Dr. Mahler. It was the doctor who had paid $5,000 for Millie's medical expenses and resigned after Millie passed away. Zach admired this doctor in his heart. It was said that doctors were benevolent. He truly felt this from Dr. Mahler, and he admired him very much. However, he didn't expect to see Dr. Mahler again today. At this time, Dr. Mahler was talking to the old man with white hair. "Professor, I really can't continue to practice medicine. Every time I see the white coat, I can't help but think of that little girl. She was only 7 years old. She was so young and so pitiful. I clearly had the ability to help her, but I chose to watch helplessly because she had no money. I comforted her more than once." "Dr. Moeller, her death has nothing to do with you. The rules of the hospital are not set by you. but I can't convince myself at all, because I clearly had the ability to help her, and I could have let her live a healthy life, but I chose to turn a blind eye to it, until some kind-hearted people were willing to help her, and she was about to receive a new life. But then, she died before surgery. Teacher, I felt that my hands were filled with blood. It was my indifference that caused her to die. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Dr. Muller held his head and cried. At this moment, he acted like a child. The huge pressure of Millie's death made him unable to bear it anymore. It even directly cut off his career as a doctor. The director, Fallon, stretched out his hand and patted Dr. Muller's shoulder. You are a good student. You are the teacher's favorite student. Back then, the teacher had told you that among the students taught by the teacher, you are not the most talented or the most attentive, but the kindest one. Muller, the word doctor's benevolence, my teacher could clearly feel it from you. You truly live up to your name. Regardless of whether you are going to be a doctor or not, the teacher will be pleased. You will always be the teacher's best student. Patting Dr. Muller's shoulder again, Fallon sighed and said, a good student. Dr. Muller was indeed a good person. Zach, who was standing outside the office, had to be touched by his kindness. Zach knocked on the door, but he did not go in. Instead, he left enough time for Dr. Muller to wipe away his tears. After all, he was an adult. Tears were a very shameful thing. Zach only entered the office after Fallon shouted, "Come in!" Fallon looked at the young man Zach and asked curiously, "You are..." At this time, Dr. Muller wiped away his tears and turned around to look at Zach. However, when he saw that it was Zach, his face was full of surprise. "Mr. Marquez, how could it be you?" Zach smiled. "What a coincidence. I came to find Director Fallon to discuss something. I didn't expect that you would be here either." Hearing their conversation, Fallon looked at Dr. Muller curiously. "You two know each other?" Dr. Muller nodded his head. "Yes, we know each other. Teacher, this is the kind-hearted person I told you about, who paid $5,000 to help save the little girl for free. Zach, Mr. Marquez." Fallon heard this and quickly stood up. He respected Zach's kindness. Fallon left his seat and walked to the front and back of the room. He stretched out his hand. "Good guy. Mr. Marquez is a good guy." Zach quickly stretched out his hands and held Fallon's hands tightly. I dare not. Dr. Muller is a real good man. He can nurture Dr. Muller. Fallon must be a person with noble medical ethics for such a good student. Compared to you guys, I am nothing." Zach was not being polite, but speaking the truth. If he were to put himself in Dr. Muller's shoes, he did not think that he could do what Dr. Muller did. This wasn't just a kind of medical ethics. It was also a kind and great kindness. Fallon waved his hand in embarrassment. "Muller is a good doctor, but I am not qualified to be called a noble doctor. Mr. Marquez, please sit down." After telling Zach to take a seat, the three of them chatted for a while. From their conversation, Zach learned that Fallon was a PhD teacher, and Dr. Muller was his student when he studied PhD. Both of them were experts when it came to children. Fallon's family had a business. After he inherited the family's business, he was not good at doing business, so he made this private hospital. Later, his reputation slowly became better. It was indeed not bad. However, the continuous occurrence of the 3 medical accidents had become the turning point of Honey Hospital. Until now, it was almost bankrupt. Now that this hospital has been put up for auction, it won't be able to pay back the loan from the bank when purchasing medical equipment. Naturally, the other party will take it away. So, don't call me Director Fallon anymore. How can you call me that? Fallon smiled bitterly, as if he didn't understand why he would get the wrong result, even though he was doing the right thing. However, he didn't talk too much about this matter. He immediately changed the topic to Zach's intention. "Mr. Marquez, what do you mean by coming here?" Zach said, I won't hide the truth from you and Dr. Muller. When I didn't save Millie back then, it was very difficult for me. So recently, I have been thinking about whether I can invest in a hospital and use low fees to help the people do medical services. But the hospital will be responsible for all the medical expenses when the poor patients on the other side are like Millie's patients. Fallon and Dr. Muller looked at each other, and then just looked at each other. Fallon then said, "This is a good thing. Good luck to the people and benefit the people. It is a very good thing, Mr. Marquez. Have you ever thought about this? If this is the case, the small profits that the hospital makes from other patients may only be enough for the treatment of poor patients. It's even possible that as more and more poor patients are treated for free, the hospital will invest more and more money into the hospital. To put it bluntly, if you don't have some skills, you will have to continuously invest so much money into the hospital, even if you don't have money. What are you up to?" Zach waved his hand. "I did this for the sake of treating a patient like Millie. But I am a businessman. I will never do things that are purely invested and have no income. So I will find some profit points to appropriate places to get subsidies from the hospital. But don't worry, Director Fallon. My so-called profit points do not refer to the medical aspect. For the welfare of the people, it is the most basic for me to invest in the hospital." Fallon came to a sudden realization. "I understand now. Mr. Marquez wants to buy over our hospital and then do his thing." Zach smiled and nodded. "So, you are still Director Fallon. I trust you in this aspect." Zach had already arranged for Donnie to investigate Fallon, and there was also an interview regarding him on the internet. Fallon was a level 2 professor, chief physician, doctor, child surgery professor, and a doctoral teacher. He focused on the general surgery department and children's tumors. He had more in-depth research on children's tumors, children's liver, bile diseases, and so on. He had a deep understanding of the mechanism of cancer in children's gallbladder expansion, children's malignant tumors, and the treatment of children's liver tumors. He had successfully cured a large number of difficult children's liver diseases in the Department of Hepatobiliary and Pancreatic Surgery and Children's Tumors. It could be said that Fallon was definitely at the top in terms of medical skills. There was no need to talk about medical ethics. If he could nurture an outstanding student like Dr. Muller, how bad could Fallon's medical ethics be? Therefore, the moment Zach entered, he had already made up his mind. However, he also had to figure out one thing. The reason for the 3 consecutive medical accidents back then was exactly why. Episode 388. What a coincidence. Knowing that Zach trusted him and was willing to work in a hospital like this, Fallon felt touched and agreed with him. "The ownership of this hospital doesn't belong to me anymore. It has already been pawned to the bank. The bank has already decided to hold an auction. Even if I were to return the money in a flash, including the overdue fees, the auction cannot be revoked." Fallon still wanted to explain the reason, but Zach waved his hand to indicate that it was fine. "The auction is, according to my understanding of the bank's collateral auction process, the funds that exceed the interest and overdue fees are all owned by the collateral holder, which is the Honey Hospital. This way, no matter how much money we spend in the auction, it will still belong to us. Moreover, the auction of collateral rarely exceeds the original value of collateral. That means I may obtain ownership of the Honey Hospital at a lower price. If that's the case, then I might even be able to make a profit from the bank." Fallon was the dean, not a businessman, but he understood Zach's reasoning. That's good. It will not affect Mr. Marquez's acquisition. That's good." Zach smiled and said, "You better not call me Mr. Marquez. I am not used to it. Just call me Zach." Fallon was amused. He wasn't a person who cared about this kind of honorifics. Now that Zach was pleasing to the eye, and what he said was right, he wouldn't be polite anymore. "All right then, Zach. Don't call me Dean Fallon in the future. Just call me Old Fallon." Zach and Fallon had a pleasant conversation. One was willing to sell, while the other was willing to buy. It was very harmonious. But at this time, Mueller seemed a little bit anxious. "Mr. Marquez, if it is really filmed, can you let me come back here to work? I can't let go of my profession as a doctor. Other than curing diseases and saving people, I won't do anything else." "Of course you can. I can't wait to see you." Zach really needed someone like Mueller, who had medical skills and morals. He knew very well that it was not that Mueller could not find a job, but that he could not accept it. It was the hospital's rule to get out of here if you did not have money. Now that Mueller had taken the initiative to request to work in the hospital, Zach naturally wished for it. Therefore, Zach felt that it was the most suitable for him to be the deputy director. Fallon also nodded. "Zach, what you said makes sense. I will not avoid the marriage once. With Mueller's medical ethics and medical skills, he was definitely qualified to be the deputy director. Moreover, he has good medical ethics. He will definitely give the whole hospital a good start." Zach raised his thumb. "Old Fallon is right. That's what I meant. The one who knows me as Old Fallon. We have to have a drink." Fallon laughed. "Okay, drink. Drink." Mueller was also very happy. It was just that he had just jumped over and was going to be the deputy dean. It was also not appropriate, right? His position was too high. He began to reject this position, feeling that it wasn't appropriate for him. But Zach's insistence and Fallon's consolation still made him accept it in the end. What he accepted wasn't just the position of deputy dean, but also the responsibility of a deputy dean. After that, Zach changed the topic to the previous 3 medical accidents. Fallon couldn't help but frown when he mentioned this. "These 3 medical accidents shouldn't have happened, but they happened. Although it didn't cause any death, it had a huge impact on the patient's future life. Therefore, as the director, I have a responsibility that I can't shirk. But there's one thing that I can't shirk. How should I put it? Zach, you are an honest person, so I won't hide it from you. Although there is no evidence, I still suspect that this matter is closely related to the Cunningham Medical Group." Fallon's expression was very serious. He wasn't a person who would speak without thinking. Therefore, since he dared to speak, he must have some serious doubts. Zach listened attentively. Fallon said solemnly, "Cunningham Medical Group is the biggest hospital in this city. It is also a private hospital, and it was established later than our Honey Hospital. But they have developed very quickly. Even the reputation of the public hospital has been surpassed by them. From this point of view, I quite admire them. However, according to what I know, the few doctors in our hospital who had medical accidents joined the Cunningham Medical Group after that, and they also received higher positions and salaries than before. If this is the case, then our medical accidents have something to do with the Cunningham Medical Group, and that is irresponsible. However, there was a doctor who told me that before the medical accident happened, Chairman Holland Cunningham of the Cunningham Medical Group came into contact with them alone. Holland Cunningham hopes that the excellent doctors in my hospital will work in their medical group and promise to get a higher position and salary. However, before he goes, he needs to sign a confidentiality agreement. As for the content of the confidentiality agreement, we don't know. Moreover, not only our Honey Hospital, but even the city hospital had the same thing happen. There were medical accidents, attending physicians jumping ship, and doctors with a good reputation in the hospital were poached. It was exactly the same as what happened to our Honey Hospital. Don't tell me that this is not worth suspecting. If this was not worthy of suspicion, then there was really nothing to be suspicious about. However, the problem was that even though he suspected it, doubt didn't mean that it could be used as evidence. Therefore, whether it was the Honey Hospital or the People's Hospital in the city, there was no sufficient evidence to prove that these medical accidents were related to the Cunningham Medical Group. But if it was really related to the Cunningham Medical Group, then the Cunningham Medical Group's courage was really too great. Controlling the doctor, he deliberately tampered with the patient's surgery and cause medical accidents to occur. This was a crime. Fallon sighed. I don't want this to happen. I hope my judgment is wrong. If the misfortune is real, then the Cunningham Medical Group seriously lacks the morality and conscience of being a medical staff. After understanding these things, Zach nodded his head and did not say anything else. He believed that the white could not be black, and the black could not be white. There would be a day when the truth of this matter would be revealed. Moreover, if it was necessary, he would personally reveal the truth. If it was really done by the Cunningham Medical Group, he did not mind stepping on this group like a pile of shit. The three of them talked in the hospital until noon. Under Fallon's generous invitation, Zach went to Fallon's home for lunch. Muller was driving in front of Fallon, and Zach was sitting in the car behind him. After walking and stopping for half an hour, the car arrived in front of Fallon's house. It was hard to imagine that Fallon, who could afford to manage a hospital, actually lived in a house in the suburbs. Although it was also tidied up quite well, and the 2 floors above and below were known as a small villa in the countryside, it still could not match the price of a building in the city. The car stopped, and Zach and Muller entered the house together under Fallon's invitation. Unexpectedly, just as they entered the living room, Zach saw 2 familiar faces. One was big, and the other was small. At this moment, the small one was happily running towards Fallon. Grandpa! Grandpa? Fallon was actually Leandra's grandfather, who was crying and begging for the Barbie dolls on the street last night. What a coincidence. Episode 389. I Can't Waste It. As the head nurse of the Honey Hospital, Sandra naturally had no job as the head nurse, now that the hospital was being auctioned off as collateral. Although Fallon had swept away all the money in his family, he was still her biological father after all, so she had to take care of him. Thinking that it was the weekend, he had nothing to do. Leandra also made a fuss about coming to find her maternal grandfather, so Sandra brought it over. But she never would have thought that Fallon actually brought back guests at noon today. She did not prepare lunch for so many people at all. What was even more surprising was that one of the guests was actually the young man who gave Leandra the Barbie doll last night. Dad, this is... Facing the daughter's question, Fallon warmly introduced him. This is amazing. Didn't your Greg want to buy a wind chaser? This is the chairman of Dream Group, Zach. Sandra was stunned. She had never thought that this handsome young man was the boss of Dream Group. The wind chaser, which made her husband lose himself in fear, was a product of the company. At this time, Fallon continued, Zach is going to buy our hospital now. You have to call him chairman in the future. If I wasn't a few years old and shameless, I would call him chairman too. Fallon was quite happy. After learning Zach's true identity on the way, he knew that the hospital sold the right person this time. Windchaser was known by everyone. It was said that they had recently won 3 major awards overseas. That was very impressive. If a car manufacturing company was so caring, they would definitely put more effort into the medical industry. So Fallon was especially happy. But his happiness was his daughter Sandra's shock. No matter what, she would never have thought that the chairman of the Dream Group would actually buy over her family's hospital and even come to her father's house at this moment. The 2 of them were chatting happily. Compared to the young man who told Leandra the story last night, Sandra really could not overlap the 2 figures. Walking to Zach, Sandra said to him, I did not have time to thank you last night. Thank you. Leandra also noticed Zach at this time. She struggled out of Fallon's embrace and quickly rushed forward. Thank you, Uncle! This time, it was Fallon's turn to be stunned. No, what does that mean? You guys know each other? Sandra smiled and nodded. She then told him what happened last night. Even Leandra felt a little embarrassed. Grandpa, I won't ask for things randomly in the future. Knowing that Zach had met his daughter and granddaughter for such a long time, Fallon was delighted. Zach, You have planned this for a long time. You only came to find me after getting close to the people around me." Zack smiled and waved his hand. "Old Fallon, what you said is wrong. This is fate. Fate." Fallon nodded solemnly and was very happy. "That's right. That's fate. Fate." After that, Zack, Fallon, and Muller sat down and chatted. Sandra went into the kitchen to cook. Zack saw that Donnie was uncomfortable staying there, so he said to him, "Take Leandra out to play. Go around nearby." Donnie had followed Zack for a long time, so he naturally understood what Zack meant. So he smiled and called Leandra out to play with him. Leandra did not have any objections either. After reporting to Sandra, she followed Donnie outside. While drinking tea and chatting, Fallon said to Zack, "Although our purpose is to benefit the people's livelihood, there is one thing that needs to be arrested. That is to prevent some people who are obviously rich but think of ways to get free treatment. This kind of person is very detestable. He is obviously very rich, but he would rather squander his money to make money. It is as if he thinks that it would hurt heaven and earth if he did not make money. I hate people like him very much." Muller, who knew about this, said, "In the past, the teacher did a free medical treatment once, but it was limited to only accepting the registration of 20 people. However, even though the screening was very strict, in the end, after the interrogation, we still found out that more than a dozen families were able to fork out enough money. There was even a son who was the chairman of a listed company. He was very self-righteous and said that since it was free, why couldn't he enjoy it? It would be better to save money to let his grandson travel overseas. You said that such a person can't be angry. Other people are waiting for treatment to save their lives, but he snatched the opportunity to save money for his grandson to travel. He is simply an old loser. He deserves to die in a car accident half a month later." Muller was not a person with a poisonous mouth, so he was naturally extremely angry to be able to say such words. But thinking about it, it was indeed quite infuriating. It was not like the old man's family did not have money, so why would he fight with the poor for his life? The reason why he was willing to save money for his grandson to travel overseas was because he really wished that he could stab an old man to death with a knife. How could his grandson travel abroad at a higher price than other people's lives? It was simply a waste of medical resources. Zack nodded. Regarding this point, he indeed needed to consider it. Although he did not lack money, it did not mean that he could be a spendthrift. After that, Fallon and Muller began to make plans. If the family found out that the family had enough assets, they would have to pay double the medical fees. To set up a special qualification review team, it had to be the efficient and honest kind. It could not delay the treatment of the patients. It could not allow them to use their public power for personal use. Fallon and Muller had put forward a lot of suggestions, and Zack kept them in mind. Regarding this, he would let the company come up with an effective plan. About half an hour later, Donnie came back with Leandra and many things in his hands. There were children's snacks and toys, as well as ready-made lunch. These were the true intentions of Zack to send Donnie out. Donnie also completely understood the intention of the boss to send him out. Leandra lowered her head and said to the snacks and toys, "I don't want them, but Uncle must buy them. Then Uncle lied to me and said that he didn't buy them for me." The little girl was quite smart. This caused everyone to smile.